If you were a pregnant woman in the year 1850, the absolute most dangerous place you could possibly go to give birth was a prestigious, state-of-the-art modern hospital. In fact, you were statistically far safer giving birth in a dark, dirt-floor rock shelter 50,000 years ago, surrounded by people who had never even heard of a germ. It sounds completely backward, doesn't it? We are taught that before modern medicine, childbirth was just a lonely, brutal game of Russian roulette. A tragedy where mothers routinely died in caves, helpless and isolated. But when male physicians took over childbirth in the 19th century, they managed to make birth significantly more lethal than it had been for the previous 100,000 years of human history. They brought women into crowded, unsanitary wards without washing their hands, sparking massive outbreaks of childbed fever that killed thousands. So, how exactly did ancient women navigate the most physically demanding, life-threatening event of their lives without doctors, sanitizers, or surgery? And why is the highly clinical, motionless way we treat birth in hospitals today actually fighting against our evolutionary anatomy? To understand why ancient women had to get creative, we first have to look at why human birth is so uniquely, ridiculously difficult. If you look at almost any other primate on the planet, birth is a relatively straightforward affair. A female chimpanzee will feel her contractions, wander away from the troop into a quiet spot in the forest, squat down, and easily slide the baby out. The baby's head is small, the chimp's pelvis is wide, and the birth canal is a straight, simple tube. The baby literally slides out facing the mother, allowing her to easily reach down, pull it up to her chest, clean its airways, and clear its umbilical cord. The whole process is over in a matter of hours, often in complete silence. But for humans, human birth is a mechanical nightmare. We've already talked about the obstetrical dilemma, how walking on two upright legs narrowed the human pelvis, while our brains simultaneously exploded in size. But it gets even worse. Because of the way our upright pelvis had to be reshaped, the human birth canal is not a straight tube. It is a highly distorted, twisting, three-dimensional obstacle course. The entrance to the human birth canal is widest from side to side, but the exit of the birth canal is widest from front to back. This means a human baby cannot simply slide straight out. To be born, the baby must execute a complex, highly precise series of internal twists and turns as it moves downward. Anthropologists call these the cardinal movements of labor. The baby has to enter the pelvis sideways, rotate its head 90 degrees mid-transit to face backward, slide its shoulders through diagonally, and then rotate again. It is literally like trying to turn a jagged, heavy key inside a highly tight, flesh-walled lock. And because of this mechanical twist, human babies almost always exit the birth canal facing away from their mothers. This is an absolute evolutionary anomaly. If an ancient human mother tried to reach down and pull her own baby out from behind, the way a chimp mother does, she would be pulling against the natural curve of the infant's spine. She would risk bending its neck backward, snapping its spinal cord, or suffocating the infant before it could take its first breath. In other words, human biology made a deliberate historical decision. We are the only primates on Earth who cannot safely give birth alone. This is where the myth of the lonely cave woman completely falls apart. Our ancestors did not give birth in isolation. Because of the mechanical dangers of our anatomy, we evolved to be obligate midwives. We literally had to invent cooperative birthing just to keep our species from ending. The oldest profession in human history wasn't what popular culture wants you to think. It was midwifery. For hundreds of thousands of years, the moment a woman went into labor, the community mobilized. Birth was an intensely social, deeply sacred, female-led event. Sisters, grandmothers, mothers, and experienced local healers, the midwives, would gather inside the shelter. They brought with them a massive, accumulated library of oral knowledge, passed down through generations of lived experience. And their role wasn't just physical, it was deeply psychological. In modern hospitals, we often treat labor as a purely mechanical event, something to be managed with synthetic drugs, monitors, and schedules. But biologically, labor is entirely controlled by a delicate, highly sensitive hormonal dance. The primary hormone that drives contractions and dilates the cervix is oxytocin, the hormone of love, trust, and connection. But oxytocin has a mortal enemy named adrenaline. If an ancient laboring mother became terrified, cold, or felt exposed, her brain would instantly flood her body with adrenaline. In the wild, this is a vital survival mechanism. If a saber-toothed cat approaches your camp while you are in labor, Adrenaline instantly stalls your contractions, shunts blood to your muscles, and allows you to run for your life. You cannot afford to drop a baby while fleeing a predator. But in a peaceful setting, high adrenaline is a disaster. It stalls labor, increases pain, and causes uterine distress. Ancient midwives understood this instinctively, even if they didn't have the scientific vocabulary for it. Their primary job was to keep adrenaline low and oxytocin high. They kept the shelter warm. They sang rhythmic, soothing songs. They massaged the mother's back, held her hands, and whispered stories of survival. Today, modern science calls this the doula effect. Studies consistently show that when a laboring woman is surrounded by continuous, supportive female figures, labor times are significantly shorter, and the need for medical intervention completely plummets. But the midwives didn't just provide comfort, they also understood physics. If you walk into a modern hospital today, you will almost certainly see laboring women lying flat on their backs, with their feet in stirrups. This is called the lithotomy position. To an evolutionary biologist, this position is an absolute horror show. Lying flat on your back forces you to push a heavy baby uphill, directly against gravity. It compresses the major blood vessels supplying oxygen to the fetus. And worst of all, it tilts the tailbone inward, physically narrowing the pelvic opening by up to 30%. How did ancient women do it? They stood up, they squatted, they kneeled, they leaned against trees, or they sat on low, hollowed-out birthing stools. They let gravity do 70% of the work for them. By staying upright and moving during labor, the pelvis naturally expands, the baby's head aligns perfectly with the birth canal, and the intense pressure of gravity naturally helps the tissues stretch safely. And when the baby was finally born, the care didn't stop there. Postpartum hemorrhage, heavy bleeding after birth, is the leading cause of maternal death worldwide. In a world without modern operating rooms, how did ancient women survive this? They used immediate, skin-to-skin contact. The moment the baby was born, the midwives would place the wet, warm infant directly onto the mother's bare chest and encourage immediate breastfeeding. This immediate sensory stimulation triggers a massive, sudden surge of oxytocin in the mother's brain. This hormonal spike forces the uterus to contract violently, clamping down on the open blood vessels where the placenta just detached, naturally stopping the bleeding. They also used empirical pharmacology. Across every ancient culture, midwives used specific plants like wild ginger, shepherd's purse, or ergot derivatives. Herbs we now know contain active chemical compounds that stimulate uterine contractions and staunch bleeding. We have spent the last century medicalizing birth, treating it as a disease or a clinical pathology, rather than a natural, highly evolved physiological process. And while modern emergency medicine is undeniably a miracle that saves lives when things go genuinely wrong, we often forget that our bodies are not broken machines. Your ancestors survived because they weren't alone. They survived because when the storm was raging outside the cave, they had a village of women who knew exactly how to hold them up, guide them through the dark, and welcome the next generation into the light. And if you want to understand how that village managed to keep those fragile, screaming newborns alive once they actually made it into that primeval world, click the video on your screen right now. I'll see you there.